The Witch in the Stone Boat. Once upon a time, a king and queen had a son named Sigurd who was incredibly strong, energetic, and attractive. The monarch told his son that he should start looking for a suitable mate for himself when he started to feel the weight of age, because he didn't know how long he would live and wanted to see him get married before he passed away. Being open to the idea, Sigurd asked his father for advice on where to look for a bride. The monarch replied that he believed it would be most desirable if Sigurd could marry a beautiful daughter of a certain country's ruler. Sigurd then prepared for his journey and followed his father's instructions to go there. He came to the king and asked his daughter's hand. The king gladly agreed to give him the hand of his daughter but only on the condition that he stay as long as he could, because the king himself was weak and unfit to rule his kingdom. Sigurd agreed to this condition but added that he would need permission to return to his own country on his father's death. Following that, Sigurd wed the princess and worked with his father-in-law to run his kingdom. After a year, Sigurd and the princess welcomed the son, who was just 2 years old when Sigurd learned of his father's passing. Sigurd now prepared to return home with his wife and child and went on board a ship to go by sea. They had been sailing for a few days when all of a sudden the breeze died and it became completely quiet. They just needed to travel for a day more to reach his kingdom. Sigurd and his queen were on the deck spending some time there talking as their young son joined them. All the others on the ship had gone to sleep. After a while, Sigurd's sleepiness made it impossible for him to stay awake. He went below and lay down, leaving his wife and son alone on the deck. After spending some time on the deck, the queen saw something black on the sea which seemed to be coming closer. As it got closer, she could make out that it was a boat and could see someone rowing it. Finally, the boat came alongside the ship, and now the queen could see that it was a stone boat, out of which emerged on board the ship a fearfully ugly witch. The queen was very scared than words could describe, and could neither speak a word nor move from the place so as to awaken the king or the sailors. The witch came up to the queen, took her son from her, and laid it on the deck. Then she took the queen and stripped her of all her fine clothes, which she put on herself and looked then like a human being. Last of all she took the queen, put her into the boat and said, "This spell I lay upon you, that you slacken not your course until you come to my brother in the When the boat could no longer be seen, the child began to cry, and though the witch tried to pacify it, she could not manage it. So, with the child on her arm, she went below to where the king was sleeping and awakened him, scolding him for leaving them alone on deck while he and all the crew were asleep. "It was great carelessness of him," she said, "to leave no one to watch the ship with her." Sigurd was quite surprised to hear his queen talk to him in such manner and scold him so much, for she had never said an angry word to him in the past, but he thought it was quite excusable in this case, and tried to pacify his son along with her, but it was of no use. Then he went and wakened the sailors and bade them hoist the sails, for a breeze had sprung up and was blowing straight towards the harbor. They soon reached Sigurd country, and found all the people mourning the death of their king, but they were glad when they got their king's son Sigurd back to the court. Sigurd was now the new king. The new King Sigurd's son, however, hardly ever stopped crying from the time he had been taken from his mother on the deck of the ship, although he had always been such a good child before. Hence, one of the maid of the court was appointed as a nurse to take care of him. As soon as the nurse took charge of the child, he stopped crying and behaved as well as before. After the sea voyage, it seemed to the king that the queen had changed a lot in many ways, and that it was not too long before others began to notice her stubborn behavior. In the court there were two young fellows, one of 18 years old, the other of 19, who were very fond of playing chess and often sat long inside playing at it. Their room was next the queen's, and often during the day they heard the queen talking. One day they paid more attention than usual when they heard her talk, and put their ears close to a crack in the wall between the rooms, and heard the queen say quite plainly, "When I yawn a little, then I am a nice little maiden, when I yawn halfway, then I am half a troll, and when I yawn fully, then I am a troll altogether." As she said this, she yawned tremendously, and in a moment had put on the appearance of a fearfully ugly troll. Then there came up through the floor of the room a three-headed giant with a trough full of meat, who saluted her as his sister and set down the trough before her. She began to eat out of it and never stopped till she had finished it. The young fellows saw all this going on, but did not hear the two of them say anything to each other. They were stunned at how greedily the queen devoured the meat and how much she ate of it, and were no longer surprised that she ate so little when she sat at table with the king. As soon as Now we must go back to the king's son after he had been put in charge of the nurse. One evening, after she had lit a candle and was holding the child, several planks sprang up in the floor of the room, and out at the opening came a beautiful woman dressed in white, with an iron belt round her waist, to which was fastened an iron chain that went down into the ground. The woman came up to the nurse, took the child from her, and pressed it to her breast. Then she gave it back to the nurse and returned by the same way as she had come, and the floor closed over her again. Although the woman had not spoken a single word to her, the nurse was very much frightened, but told no one about it. Next evening the same thing happened again, just as before, but as the woman was going away she said in a sad tone, "Two are gone and one only is left," and then disappeared as before. The nurse was still more frightened when she heard the woman say this, and thought that perhaps some danger was hanging over the child. The most mysterious thing was the woman saying, "And only one is left," but the nurse guessed that this must mean that only one day was left, since she had come for 2 days already. At last the nurse made up her mind to go to the king. She told him the whole story and asked him to be present in person the next day about the time when the woman usually came. The king promised to do so, and came to the nurse's room a little before the time and sat down on a chair with his drawn sword in his hand. Soon after, the planks in the floor sprang up as before, and the woman came up, dressed in white, with the iron belt and chain. The king saw at once that it was his own queen, and immediately cut apart the iron chain that was fastened to the belt. This was followed by such noises and crashings down in the earth that the entire palace shook, so that no one expected anything else than to see every bit of it shaken to pieces. At last the noises and shaking stopped, and they began to come to themselves again. The king and queen embraced each other, and she told him the whole story, how the witch came to the ship when they were all asleep and sent her off in the boat. After she had gone so far that she could not see the ship, she sailed on through darkness until she landed beside a three-headed giant. The giant wished her to marry him, but she refused, whereupon he locked her up by herself and told her she would never get free until she consented. After a time she began to plan how to get her freedom, and at last told him that she would consent if he would allow her to visit her son on earth 3 days on end. He agreed, but put on her this iron belt and chain, the other end of which she fastened around his own waist, and the great noises that were heard when the king cut the chain must have been caused by the giants falling down the underground passage when the chain gave way so suddenly. The giant's dwelling, indeed, was right under the palace, and the terrible shakings must have been caused by him in his death throes. The king now understood how the queen he had had for some time past had been so ill-tempered. He at once had a sack drawn over her head and made her be stoned to death, and after that torn in pieces by untamed horses. The 2 young fellows also told now what they had heard and seen in the queen's room, for before this they had been afraid to say anything about it, on account of the queen's power. The real queen was now restored to all her dignity and was loved by all. The nurse was married to a nobleman, and the king and queen gave her expensive and beautiful presents.